we're going to be talking about dietary recall. Basically, as dietitians, you would know it's one of the most primary tools, and in fact, one of the most important tools that we use in practice. And based on this tool and how we use it, only we prescribe the diet or make our nutrition prescription. So the nutrition care process, as we call our therapy, consists of 4 interrelated steps. First one is nutrition assessment, followed by nutrition diagnosis, which is based on our assessment. Based on our diagnosis, we plan the prescription or the nutrition intervention. And then, of course, over time, we monitor it and evaluate it as to how effective the nutrition intervention has been. So today we are going to be talking about the first process, that's the nutrition assessment. This is, of course, the foundation of the whole NCP. In fact, it's a systematic method for obtaining, verifying, and interpreting the data that we gather, from which we tend to identify problems which are nutrition related and their causes, and how important they are in the whole scheme of things when we see a patient with multiple comorbidities or multiple issues. On the basis of this, we develop the nutrition prescription, and of course, then the same tool is again used to measure the effectiveness of the intervention. So in the past, people like us and a lot of our senior members would agree that we were taught that nutrition assessment consisted of 4 alphabets, A, B, C, D. And that was A stood for anthropometry, B for biochemical tests, C for clinical information, and D for diet evaluation. With the new guidelines for NCP from the American Dietetic Association or the Academy, they have introduced 5 steps. So the A, B, C remain the same. C becomes client history instead of just the clinical information, which again emphasizing that there are a lot of other factors which affect the nutrition prescription. I will be talking about it a bit in detail later. D is, of course, the diet evaluation or the food nutrition related history. And 5th step that has been added is the nutrition focused physical findings. So if we start with the A, the anthropometric measurements, before we move on to the dietary recall, besides the height and weight, which we know we all take, we can of course use the simple measure tape to get the waist circumference, which tells us a lot, especially in the for the Indian population. As you know, it is extremely important. It is perhaps more important than the body mass index. Also, then of course the skin fold calipers, which are more often than not used in the research setting, and then any machine which uses BIA. I use this machine, and it gives us a lot more data than just the weight. And in fact, the data that comes from this machine very often helps us to make, of course, plan the nutrition intervention better, but even more to convince the patient that with this detailed data, you definitely need to increase your protein intake. You need to increase your muscle mass, which is one of the most common issues that we face in the Indian population. Most of you would agree with me on that. Because the body fat percentage is high, is kind of, it is very obvious. Patients also agree with it most of the time. But what they don't agree with or they don't realize is that the muscle mass is very low, and one needs to work on that. So these readings kind of help us with that. Secondly, biochemical parameters. So we as dietitians must be familiar with many of the laboratory tests, including the reasons for ordering, why the doctors have ordered that test, and we should be able to also interpret the results. Because very often patients come to us even after the blood test, even before they've met the doctors, and they are just wanting to know. I mean, there's a lot of anxiety there. They want to know what the numbers mean. We may not be want to interpret all of them, but things, tests which are related to nutrition. For example, if you have a CBC in front of you and the iron studies, one should be able to identify whether it is iron deficiency anemia, whether it's just the B12 and folic acid which will do the job, or do we need to increase the iron intake through diet, or we need to think about iron supplements. For this, we need to be able to interpret CBC and the iron studies well. Similarly, if some patient comes in with an elevated creatinine, that should not be the judgment point for us to restrict the protein intake. What we should be looking at or asking for is a urinary ACR, which is a very simple test, and then be able to stage the CKD for us to be able to decide then whether there's any protein restriction required at all. Similarly, the most commonly done tests, such as thyroid function test, if there is hypothyroidism, then again, the first question that we need to ask is whether patient is not using iodized salt. In this day and age, there is a lot of people are moving towards so-called natural salts, pink salts, senda namak. So if the thyroid, it's hypothyroidism, this is something that should come to our mind immediately. DEXA, again, one should be able to read that. And if we know that it is borderline, there is osteopenia, then again, we will have to relook and get a detailed history on the calcium intake, and maybe also explore the vitamin D status, whether it has been checked, whether it will need to be checked, and things like that. The C of it, instead of clinical history, now it is client history. Again, besides the personal medical history, we also need to look at the medication list, because there are very often drug nutrient interactions. Again, for diabetics, if we realize that the person is not on a sulfonylurea or insulin therapy, and then he complains of having low sugar levels, or she's afraid of hypos and therefore in anticipation eating more, then if we have this knowledge, we would be able to tell them that you will never have episodes of hypo, so you don't need to worry and you don't need to eat in anticipation. Many patients, in fact, take a lot of complementary alternative medicines. Again, that is something we need to know, and this becomes even more important when we see renal patients, because very often these they are nephrotoxic. They may be leading to elevated potassium levels, or even increasing the damage to the kidneys or impairing the renal function further. Physical activity details extremely important, as you all will agree. We need to kind of go deep into it. If they say they exercise 6 days of the week, that's not enough. We need to know what kind of exercise it is, what is the duration, is it resistance training, is it cardio, and what do we need to suggest to them. The other three components, whether there is emotional eating, and these two new components which have come in are extremely important: the screen time spent and also the sleep pattern, which I think these two have become even more so important in this lockdown period, where things have just gone haywire for lots and lots of people. So from getting all the information, we need to sift out what is the main complaint and the reason for referral to us, to a dietitian. Very often patients come in and they say that, oh, I'm putting on weight, I'm trying to lose weight, but it doesn't happen. I'm also constipated. I have some hair fall, and I'm also suffering from low energy levels. Now, she may want you to treat all of them separately, but one must be able to realize that perhaps these are all symptoms of hypothyroidism, and that is something that we could suggest to get tested if it has not been done. Also, a lot of time patients come in with the whole medical history of last 25 years. We need to tell them that these are number 1, 2, 3 problems that we are going to address in this meeting. And for problems 4, 5, 6, perhaps you need to go to other professionals, which we could always suggest to them, because nutrition has answers to a lot of problems, but maybe not to all. Of course, we need to know the education level of the patient and the socioeconomic status, because suggesting some fancy foods which cannot be purchased, if the purchasing power is not there, then the diet will only remain on the paper. It will never be put into practice. Education level also, a very fancy prescription may not be followed. So depending on the education level, we need to make it as simple as we can. We also need to explore the patient's role in the family. Does the patient live in the joint family? Is she the primary caregiver? Because then the amount of time she's going to spend over herself in trying to prepare a separate meal for herself may not happen. So again, that will have a very big it will be a very big factor in planning her diet. Sleeping habits, sleep apnea, mood disorders, late night Netflix watching. These days, I'm surprised, but out of 10 patients that we see, 7 of them are complaining of sleeping issues. I'm not getting sleep. So, and there's more and more data coming in which tells us that sleep habits immediately impact our well-being, because they affect most of the hormones, starting from cortisol to a range of hormones are disturbed. So exploring this is very important. Eating behaviors, is there distracted eating? Is there nighttime binging when you watch somebody's watching the Netflix program? Is he or she sitting with a jar of namkeen? Is food being used as a compensatory activity? So these are also a lot of factors which will we need to know, which will affect the nutrition prescription. This is in the tabular form, the same thing that we discussed, the age. In fact, it even helps if we ask the person, the region or the community from where she is coming from, because once you suggest food options which are very ethnic, the acceptance is very high. They feel that we actually know what we are talking about. So that is also very, very important. The fifth factor which has been added is nutrition focused physical assessment, what they call NFPA. So for example, dietitians working in a diabetes setting must be able to evaluate food care, suggest food care, how to take care of food care. Insulin injection should be able to examine insulin injection sites and even detect the presence of peripheral neuropathy with the simple tools. Those working in an outpatient setting or a clinic setting must be able to identify acanthosis, hirsutism, acne. Those in the renal setting should be able to detect edema. So these also are very important factors which add to our gathering of useful data on which we will be basing our nutrition prescription. Of course, in the US, they want the dietitians now to be able to even auscultate and even be able to identify bowel sounds. So they've kind of added some more tools which dietitians should be proficient with. So now coming to the methods of nutrition assessment, we know there are various methods. Today, I'm going to be talking about methods which are most commonly used: the 24-hour recall, the questionnaire method, the food frequency questionnaire, and the food diary method. These are the methods which are most commonly used in a clinical setting. Of course, which method to be used depends on what setting it is. For example, population-based recalls, when somebody's into designing a research study, is very different from individual recalls. So for example, for a retrospective study, we need a food frequency questionnaire and diet history, while for a prospective cohort study, we would need food frequency questionnaire along with a 24-hour recall. In the clinical setting, in an OPD setting or in a clinic, the most frequently used methods are 24-hour dietary recall, food frequency questionnaire, and the food diary. So as we all know, the 24-hour diet recall method basically involves asking the patient or the subject to recall all the foods and drinks taken in the previous 24 hours. Very often, we also ask them as to generally, what do you have for breakfast? So yes, what you had yesterday, but also what did you have generally in a week? What do you have? Give me 3-4 options. The advantage is that we can get a detailed history, but of course, it may not be truly representative of the personal usual intake unless you have had the opportunity to ask the patients to get a 3-day recall where there are 2 weekdays and 1 weekend day. That would be ideal. I do it with patients who have taken appointment in advance. Then we tell them to come with this data. That saves a lot of time, and in fact, it gives us a very good perspective instead of just one 24-hour recall. So the preparation for the interview, where we are going to do this activity of taking the recall, ideally review the medical record information beforehand, because then certain questions will be different. If we know that the person is diabetic, if we know the person is a smoker, or if we know that the person is not taking alcohol, then those questions can be skipped also. Make the environment comfortable, keep the desk neat, choose private location, which is, I think, extremely important in this lockdown period where a lot of people are doing online consultation. And as we just had some disturbance, it could be a big distraction. So yes, that is important. Keep your phone on silent. It's one of the biggest distractions. Build a rapport with the person, with the patient once he or she comes in. Greet the client. Use their name appropriately with the appropriate titles, and ask them what they would like to be called. Introduce yourself with the title. This is especially important in a hospital setting where perhaps the patient is meeting a lot of people, because this kind of expresses competence. We're talking with some authority. Small talk is always very important to break the ice. As we all know, in a city like Mumbai, even complimenting somebody to be there on time breaks the ice. And of course, just now, we can always talk about COVID. Express your interest to help and encourage client to express themselves and ask questions. Do not come out as somebody who is formidable and is not open to asking questions or discussion. This helps client feel comfortable to encourage honesty, because if you show that there's a position of authority, the person may not be very easy, will not open up, and we will not get all the right information, the correct information. Set up the food models to help client recall portion sizes, and ask them that you don't have to be embarrassed to share what you ate. There are no good foods or bad foods. And in fact, no one eats right foods all the time. A lot of time patients come in and they say, you know what, I just might love my food. So, and I tell them that, you know what, anybody who enters this room, they are all foodies. So you're not the only one, don't worry. Be absolutely comfortable with your food choices and tell us what you're having. Of course, it can be hard to remember everything eaten in the last 24 hours. So allow them some time to think and allow time for questions where we might have to probe more. So the recall etiquette tells us that we should not be patronizing, be very open-minded to elicit correct information, communicate to the patient that you are not judgmental, and most importantly, start with when you're talking about portion sizes, start with the largest portion model, largest bowl first when it comes to rice or namkeen or poha or upma, or when we're talking about chapatis, show the largest size. And you'll be surprised. It kind of really breaks the ice, and they are more open to telling us that, yes, this is my size. If we start with the smallest cup, they are too ashamed, or there is a lot of hesitancy in saying that, you know what, I actually have 3 cups of your largest bowl. So start with the largest bowl first. Common mistakes made while taking diet recalls: avoid taking recall on atypical days. If somebody has come after a long weekend, don't ask them what they've eaten over the weekend. So festivals, fast, feasts, they are not going to be representative of the client's average intake. Some of the requisites from our side: we need to have knowledge of the local foods. This is extremely important when working with ethnically diverse populations, like in cities like Mumbai and Delhi, where it's a melting pot of people from different parts of the country. It is also important at regional level that the colloquial names for the food are readily understood. For example, kurmura or bhel, what we call in Mumbai, is also called lahia, is also called muri, and is also called parmal. This same food, different names across the country. So if we show that we know this, again, as I said, there is a lot of confidence building. Interviewer should also be aware of the latest food products available on supermarket shelves. Very often patients come out and tell us that I've been having this, and if you are not aware of what is available, again, does not help the confidence building measures. So diet recall is, of course, going to tell us the caloric intake, the protein intake, the carb intake, but this is also the time to know if the patient is an escapist, is in denial of the problem or the situation, is a realist, or is a worrier. Because the diet prescription is going to be tailored accordingly. It's not only going to be based on the number of calories and the carb protein combination of carb protein composition. So a general diet call, as we all know, basically we ask about different meals, the serving size, the time when it was taken, where it was taken, is it eaten out or in the house, and maybe certain dishes, if they are different, we would also ask how they were prepared. This is because people do not eat nutrients, they eat food. So it is our job to convert this food list into nutrients then. When we are trying to estimate certain particular nutrients, this was I had done when we had to estimate the calcium intake in certain population. Then, of course, the diet recall kind of changes, and we also incorporate food frequency kind of a format in that. So the biggest challenge, as you will all agree in the diet recall, is recalling or explaining the portion sizes. We use food models. Of course, we use measuring cups, spoons, show pictures of estimated portions, which I think works the best. And of course, as I talked about info education level, if somebody needs a very simplistic form, then we would just show them the plate and tell them how the plate should look like. Excuse me. So these are some of the measuring cups that we use in the clinic. And since again, things have gone virtual and we do see a lot of patients who are NRIs from across the country, not from the country, from across the world. So these are the US American measuring cups, which are different from Indian measuring cup. So I also have the US measuring cups because that again makes more sense. What I alluded to earlier, since I have been showing these 2 cups, somebody who used to tell me that I have this cup of rice or 1.5 cup of rice is very easily now telling me that, oh, I have this much rice or maybe even little more, and this is actually double the size. So as I said, start with the larger bowl. It will be much easier to get the correct intake. There will be less inhibition from the patient side, because patient knows that the dietitian is expecting me to eat so much, so there is no problem. Of course, we have been using these measures where we say that the meat should be the size of a deck of cards, cheese should be the size of 4 dice. What I have been using again is these portion pictures, which are very relatable. So this is a 50-gram portion. This is a 100-gram portion of chicken. Similarly for cheese, it's 30, 50, 100. Nuts, again, a handful of nuts. Yes, it's easy to say that, but a lot of patients want to know exactly how much they're eating. So we've kind of figured out the number of nuts which would give you a 100-calorie snack. And again, the visual has always a higher recall when somebody sees it visually. One of the most challenging food groups that I find in dietary recalls is the Indian breads, because it can range from a fulka, 10 grams, to a bhakri, which could be 100, 120 grams. So even these have not been very accurate, because the size, yes, but then we are spending time over discussing the thickness. Even the dough balls, especially when we are telling them what to use, this is not something they can kind of take away home or remember that. What works best is, I have seen, is of course for the very committed, the kitchen measuring scale, kitchen scale, or be able to tell them the amount of flour in terms of the cup or the tablespoons. In fact, when I realized that the patient is has challenges, that she's in a joint family, or she may not be very compliant, then you just give them a cup or a tablespoon and ask them to put it in their flour box so that they know how much to use every time. So I think the carbs coming from our Indian breads or Indian preparations is one of the biggest challenge, where we can easily go wrong in estimating the caloric and the carb intake. Of course, different types of questions. Generally, we would start and have open or neutral question as to what is the first thing you eat or drink in the morning. Start with that, or tell me about your favorite foods. One should avoid leading questions like, you won't be having alcohol, right? I mean, you don't smoke, right? So be open. Close-ended questions are at times useful when the conversation seems to be running away and it goes in a storytelling mode. Then yes, we may have to ask close-ended questions as well, because the answer there will be mainly yes or no. So do you salt the food at the table? Have you tried to lose weight before? This might be just a yes or a no. Dealing with reluctant or uncomfortable clients. This is especially for the younger dietitians here, the students here. Do not be intimidated. I remember when I started off, very often the patient would not even give me eye contact, because perhaps he is thinking that I have diabetes since last 30 years, and here there's some 20-something girl who is going to try and tell me how to manage my diabetes. So it starts off from there. But as the conversation goes on, as the confidence kind of builds up, the person realizes that no, what they're talking is making sense, and they kind of come around. But do not worry if they don't give you eye contact, they show disinterest, because very often it's the other family member who is more keen and has got the person there. Very often they will answer in monosyllables. They might just say yes, no, showing that they are not really interested. But as the recall session goes on, calibrate his compliance, use this opportunity to calibrate his compliance and tailor make your nutrition advice. Because you may plan the best diet in the world, but if this is not going to be followed, then it's just a piece of paper. Dealing with another issue is that very often, do you eat sweets? The person says, oh, I never eat sweets. In fact, I seldom eat dessert. Again, here, what I realize is that a food frequency questionnaire very often comes to the rescue. because then you're not talking about sweets in general, you're asking about cakes, you're asking about pastries, you're asking about Indian mithais. Some information will come out. Very often what we realize that the interview, the recall is just kind of running away. You ask somebody, how often do you eat out? The husband wife is there, the husband is, even before answering, the wife says, oh, actually I don't like to go out, but my children really like to go out and they love to have pav bhaji. But I'm not asking that what your children like. So this is the time when we need to be slightly firm and kind of get them back on track. So when the conversation goes into a storytelling session, we need to again be slightly firm and bring them back. Certain probing techniques for the recall. Time probes. What is the first thing that you have in the morning? And they'll say, oh, I get up at 12 o'clock because I sleep late. So again, you come to realize that the skipping of breakfast, perhaps there is nighttime snacking. Activity probe. Do you have anything while watching Netflix at night? And again, you will get a caloric intake, which perhaps was not reflected when they told you what did they have last night in the last 24 hours. Food probes, very, very important. What kind of milk, what kind of chapati, what kind of bread are you using? Sometimes even asking the brand names helps, because for example, for multigrain atta, we know that some of the brands still, patients think they are using multigrain, but it's still 95% wheat. So these are some probing questions that we need to definitely ask. Method of preparation, especially for something like chivda, that could be roasted, it could be fried, and it will make a whole lot of difference. Similarly, for fried fish, is it a pan fried fish? Is it a deep fried fish? Similarly, behavioral probes. Have you tried to lose weight earlier? Do you watch TV or scroll your phone while eating? Extremely important. Do you eat when you're upset or stressed? Especially for children, I think we know that we need to very often ask the parents, especially in case of young children, but you'll be surprised, even 8 and 9 and 10 years old exactly know what they're eating. And when a child comes in with the parent, usually you should give more time, because it goes into a slanging match where the mother insists that she's having this much vegetable and the child insists that she has at least this much vegetable. And that kind of goes on for every food healthy food that we are discussing. So the dietary recall, the strength of this technique lies in the fact that theoretically unlimited level of specificity can be obtained from this method. Respondent burden is relatively low, literacy is not required, and the procedure does not alter food intake patterns, because we are asking after they have had the meal, unless we've asked them to get the 3-day recall. The weaknesses are, of course, there would be a possibility of recall bias. Patients may not tell you what they think was unhealthy. It also depends on respondents' ability to recall intake accurately. And if we want to use 24-hour recall for evaluating and for follow-up, that could be a time-consuming method. I always feel that when I combine a 24-hour diet recall with a food frequency questionnaire, I'm able to get especially the empty calories and the fat consumption better, because both of these get reflected better when we combine the FFQ with a 24-hour recall. And because a person might not have eaten sweets the previous night, but perhaps he has sweets 4 times in a week. It was just that the last night he did not have, or he chose not to tell you. But when we ask the frequency, it generally reflects. The third method is the food diary assessment, which we often use more for evaluation. We've done the dietary recall, we've given them a nutrition prescription, and now we need to evaluate it over time. This would be a very good assessment tool, which I use all the time. So here we, of course, the meals are split up and the patients are asked to enter. Even the patient also given a checklist as to whether they're drinking enough water, are they exercising daily. And For diabetics, for example, we also give them an SMBG chart, and patients are immediately able to realize that the food that they ate and the sugars, there is a direct reflection. So it works as an excellent education tool. This is somebody who has kept it on computer, again, a food record chart, and it was so easy to identify that he was having fruit with every meal, and that was what was leading to the sugar spikes. So excellent tool, one must kind of use it, encourage it. There are a lot of patients who say, oh, I will never do it. They'll ask their wives to do it. Somebody will say, oh, I'm never going to write down. It takes too much time. There are enough excuses that people come out with. So the conventional food diary gives a detailed overview. There may not be any recall bias, provides detailed intake. There could be possible underreporting, of course, and multiple days to assess the usual intake. One day may not be enough. Food diary can go horribly wrong. Here is somebody, the wife is packing the meal and the husband is selling that healthy lunch to buy fast food. So he may be very quietly writing down the dabba in the diary, but it could be something very different. Now there are, of course, new technology food diaries, mobile phone applications, which are, again, very useful. The youngsters find it a lot more useful. They find it easy to kind of, record. It's basically real-time recording, and then you can always share it also. As you know, you just need to be pals on, and you could see them on a very regular basis. Pictures of plates taken in real time. This actually one of my very old, she's 74 years, and this is what she does. She just clicks pictures of every meal that she has and keeps and shows it to me every time she comes. And I think it's a great tool. It's much easier for her to record, and it's much easier for me to see. Of course, you can always say that, what if she has served herself again? But that element of trust we will always have to keep in. So I think this also works great, very well. So in the end, I would like to say that dietitians must learn to utilize a diagnostic thorough process to accurately evaluate information gathered during the nutrition assessment to arrive at a very realistic and practical nutrition prescription. I think that is the most important thing. Dietary recalls not only tell us about the food intake, but also give us an idea about the attitude of the person, whether the person is doing something just because of the lack of knowledge, or he's just non-compliant, or there's an emotional eating factor involved. So in fact, taking a dietary recall is not only a science, but an art. And this is because you will agree with me, very often we don't see type 2 diabetics, we see type 8 diabetics because they are type 2 with 4 times more excuses than some patients. I would like to leave you with some of these very cryptic or answers that we get. So why did you eat yesterday? What did you eat yesterday? I don't remember. Whatever is made at home. How many meals do you have in a day? I eat whenever I feel like. Looking at the bowls, what was the portion of your rice? I don't measure and eat. So I feel that dietary recall, in fact, also helps us develop interpersonal skills, helps us develop patience, helps us make more, less judgmental, more open-minded, and we can only, I feel I'm only learning every time I take a dietary recall with my patient. So thank you so much.